Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second part of code review of Alkaa Android application written by Igor Escodro. I started to review this application in the previous video, but I couldn't get too deep into the code. Therefore, I decided to produce additional video on the same application. If you haven't seen the first part of this code review yet, then I highly recommend that you do it now. But just to remind you, Alkaa is a simple to-do list manager written for mainly educational purposes by Igor. He just wanted to learn new Android technologies. So I will get back to where I ended the last code review and will continue from there. In the previous video I reviewed this main activity, which is the only activity in this application because it uses a single activity approach. So now I would like to find its fragments. To do that, I need to go to XML declaration of main activities layout, and inside this tag fragment it has this nav graph attribute. So I go here and I find some XML document which declares the navigation graph for this application. This is a new syntax, probably part of the new navigation architecture component. So I immediately see that its start destination is task list fragment, which is defined here, and its name is task list fragment, not surprisingly, and that's what I want to review. Okay, task list fragment has two view models, similarly to the main activity. So this one is probably specific to this fragment, and this one is shared with other fragments in the activity. Navigation, some item ID, adapter for list view or recycler view. Nothing interesting in onCreate view, and here I can see onViewCreated method. Now many developers use this onViewCreated to do all kinds of stuff. However, I strongly recommend never use this method. I personally don't remember the last time I used this method, to be honest. So what I do recommend to do is using onCreateView and then onStart. So the logic from onViewCreated should be put either in onCreateView or in onStart. So let's see what bind companions does. Well, this method simply assigns adapter and layout manager to the list. It's probably a recycler view, right? And when I think about it now, I haven't worked with these synthetic properties yet, but it might be the case that you can use this kind of syntax without find view by default only after onCreateView returned. So maybe in this specific case, if you use Kotlin synthetic properties, you must do that in onViewCreated. If I would use Kotlin synthetic properties myself, I will definitely check it and see if that's the case. If not, then this bind components method can be put inside onCreateView. Find nav controller. So this method is part of, again, a navigation architecture component and probably nothing too interesting in here. Again, in my estimation, it should go to onCreateView. Okay, options menu, on start we load task, and on stop we do view model on detach. That's an interesting one. Let's go and visit this view model, see what it does in on detach. Alright, so it's composite disposable, clear. Basically, this view model uses Rx stuff, and somewhere inside here, yep, disposable and composite disposable, it adds disposables to this composite disposable, and upon call to this method, they are cleared. The reason Igor needs to do that is because he uses Rx, because if he would use live data all the way, he wouldn't need to do that. Live data takes care of clearing itself in onStop. However, what I do recommend to do, and by the way, onStop is the right place to do that. If you need to unsubscribe something on the register listeners release resources, onStop is the place where you do that. But what I would recommend to do is just call it onStop. Why change the name? ViewModel.onStop. By the way, ViewModel has like onCleared method, which is called after its fragment or activity is destroyed completely. Basically, not just rotated, but navigated off and destroyed. However, in this case, I agree with Igor that you need to unsubscribe. You need to make sure that after onStop, fragments will not get any notifications from view models. Therefore, in this case, onStop is the right place to do that. Again, I will just change the name to onStop. Okay, so bind components and load tasks. So load tasks basically assigns item ID to something fetched from the arguments or to 0 if there is no extra category ID in the arguments, and task name gets something extra category name from the arguments, or default title, which is all tasks. So what I get from here is that this fragment can show tasks from one single category, or it can show tasks from all categories altogether. And then we do view model load tasks and pass item ID in that, and basically on task loaded when it completes. Let's see the implementation of this method. Okay, so I'm in task list view model class, and this load task gets category and basically another disposable, and it goes to contract class load tasks subscribe . Alright, so let's go to task list contract class. And task list contract, if I would write this application, I would call it use case. Okay, so we've got view model class, and then we've got use case. This is kind of like clean architecture approach. So contract is like, I think, not very good name because contract is too general. And today in Android community, most developers do know what use case mean. So it's probably would be better to call this one task list use case or just tasks use case. And it has this load tasks method. And when this method is called, it checks the category ID. And here it's something very interesting. Okay, I would expect load tasks with category ID just go and fetch tasks that have this specific category ID on them. But I see now that category ID can be something like all tasks or completed tasks. So if category ID is 0, it will probably load all tasks. And if category ID is -1, then it will probably load completed tasks. This is not very good design. Why is that? Because what is done here basically is abusing a single argument of this method. When I read this code, I see category ID, I expect that I will pass category ID and get back tasks related to this category. But now I discovered that this category can also represent two additional things. Well, basically unrelated things. Either get all the tasks or get all the completed tasks. And in this case, I would say that what you should do is just create two additional methods, like load tasks for category, and then load all tasks, and then load all completed tasks. 3 methods, and you don't need this when statement, and then you don't need to overload the meaning of this category ID. Now, because this category ID has several functions, then you need actually to document this method. Okay, so category ID, the category ID to show only tasks, If 0 passed, all the categories will be shown. So you need to explicitly document what special values this category ID argument might have. And in this case, the only thing that is documented is 0, but it can have this -1 as well. So already the documentation of this method diverged from its functionality. And that will happen almost all the time when you try to abuse arguments in this manner. So again, just create 3 methods. Load tasks for category, which takes in category ID, and then load all tasks, which doesn't take any arguments, and load all completed tasks, which doesn't take any arguments either. It will be much more readable, you will not need to document it, and when I think about it, these kind of arguments that have some overloaded meanings, they usually spread inside the code base. So the code that calls this method in task list view model, now this category ID, which is passed into this load task method, should satisfy the same contract. So again, see how the Java doc being duplicated here, and again, already we see that it misses one of the nuances of this category ID argument. It can be -1. And whoever calls this method here in load tasks, we should understand that this item ID, which is taken from extra category ID, right? And so the code that sets this category ID should also know about this contract. So let's see where it's used. It's used here, category ID, item ID too long. So somewhere inside menu, we will need to put zeros and minus ones as well to satisfy the contract defined in this like task list contract. You see how the semantical meanings of this category ID argument gets all the way up to like activity and even the menu. So basically the entire application now is built on the assumption that 0 is to fetch all the tasks and minus 1 is to fetch the completed tasks. That's not something that I would recommend to do. So just have different methods and different execution paths for these flows, because it will be really difficult to track and pay attention to these kinds of meanings for variables in a reasonably big application. So let's see what else we've got in this use case. It's called task list contract, but again I will call it use case. So it has add task and update task and delete task. This contract is kind of crude, create, read, update, delete gateway, which simply basically delegates to task DAO. And task DAO is basically a room implementation of database. I would question the value of this abstraction in general, because usually when you have use cases, what you will do, you'll have load tasks use case, just one single operation, and then load all completed tasks use case, that will be another one, and then load task related to category. So you will have 3 different classes for these 3 operations. And it might look like a boilerplate, but in a reasonably big application, you know, these use cases, each of them could have like completely distinct logic. So in the long term, it's good to like decouple this execution path from one another. And surely you would have like add task use case and update task use case. And this contract, it kind of aggregates all these use cases into one single class, which is also not very useful because all it does is delegating to DAO objects, right? If you want to have use cases, then segregate the logic into distinct use case. And if you don't want to have use cases and you have this kind of like big class with multiple operations, then maybe you can just like, you know, do it from this view model. Instead of passing in task list contract, just pass the data access object, rooms DAO object, and execute these operations on your data access object directly. Okay, and task list view model also has this alarm manager. That's interesting. I would like to see how it's used. So when we do delete task, it goes delete, and then it goes alarm manager cancel task alarm. This logic, I would expect it to reside in like delete task use case. So you have delete task use case, it goes and deletes task from the database, and then it cleans up everything related to this task, including this pending alarm. And in this case, like you've got this contract, which is basically not very useful because it doesn't do anything, and the business logic, like the critical business logic, resides anyway inside view model. So in this specific case, I would argue that you can just remove this contract and simplify your code base, or introduce proper use cases, in which case this line, cancel task alarm, should probably go into like delete task use case. Because in a reasonably big application, you'll probably have multiple places where you can delete the task. In these fragments, you will probably not be able to reuse this specific view model, because view model is specific to screen. But you will be able to reuse delete task use case, and in this case, if you reuse a use case, you will also reuse this business logic. Otherwise, you will need to remember to write it each time when you provide delete task functionality. I'm not sure how coherent this explanation was, but I really hope that you got it. And if not, then basically, Igor, please write a comment to the video and maybe I will try to explain myself in text, because I feel that it was like very long discussion and maybe I lost you along the way. Alright, so we got this task list fragment. I think there is nothing special here anymore. Let's go to navgraph and find another fragment to review. Okay, so we've got this preference fragment, no, not very interesting, and task detail fragment, category list fragment, and category detail fragment. Okay, I will guess that task detail fragment is the more interesting of the remaining fragments. Okay, so it has view model, it doesn't use shared view model, this fragment, and it has task provider. What's task provider and why would this fragment need task provider if it uses view model? Well, basically view model should like take care of all the data manipulations and expose the data to the fragment. But now this fragment uses the view model and also some kind of task provider. I will take a look in a moment. And here we have this relatively low level Rx stuff composite disposable, which wasn't the case for the fragment that I reviewed before. Okay, so task list fragment, it doesn't have this kind of low level APIs because all of them are confined within view models. In this case, this fragment has view model, but it also has provider and disposable. And if I need to guess, this disposable is here because this provider is here. Okay, binding, so it's probably data binding. In an onCreate view, yep, data binding is initialized. And again, on view created, you don't need this method in most cases. So init components probably should go into onCreate view, except that this load task method, let's see, that's the task provider. And this method load task goes to task DAO get task by ID, which is again just room abstraction. So this provider does what this task list contract did in the previous fragment, and that's actually not very good. That's actually not very good because if you use one kind of approach in your application, even if it's not fortunate, okay, so most applications, well, no, let me put it that way. No application in the world uses optimal approach. You cannot get 100% clean code. However, you can get 100% consistent code, and that's what you should aim at. So if you chose an approach and you use some kind of approach in your application, don't start changing it on per screen basis. Unless it's like you say, all right, that's an experiment. And in this case, it might be experiment because all this entire application is like Igor's playground. So it's all right. But in real application, if you chose some specific approach, just stick to it. Even if you find that some other approach might be like marginally better, or maybe you think that it's much better, don't start just applying different approach in your applications because that will be really hard on all the people involved in the project. So I would say that this task details fragment, right, instead of using task provider, should delegate this functionality to task detail view model, and inside view model you can either use this provider, but again, you know, like you have this task list contract and task detail provider, and both of them do the same thing. So you should probably call them under the same name. Or you can just remove these abstractions which aren't very necessary in this case anyways, and put the logic inside view model, or alternatively, you can like enhance these abstractions and make them proper use cases that have like single responsibility. Task detail provider, and it has like load task and update task, and clear is not part of the update task and load task. Then basically extract two use cases, load task use case and update task use case from this provider. Alright, and init listeners in onView created. Why would that be the case? Okay, so we init listeners and we add them to composite disposables. Again, this kind of functionality should go to onStart method, and unregistration of listeners should go into onStop. And in this case, it doesn't go to onStop. Where it is? It's here. So in onDestroy. Well, there is clearly some mismatch of lifecycle here, because if you register listeners in onView created, which is not optimal, but okay, you do that, then you should probably unregister them on view destroyed. Is there such a method in Fragment? I don't know, but anyways, unregistering them in on destroy is too late. So what I do recommend to do is registering on start everything, like whatever you need to register or start or like kick off, do that in on start, and then unregister everything in on stop. After on stop, you should not have any listeners registered and you should not have any resources associated with this fragment. Basically, if you kill the fragment after on stop, everything should be like clean. And since it's the second fragment when I discuss lifecycle and there's clearly some mismatch of lifecycle handling, in the description to this video I will put two links, one to my article about activity lifecycle and one to the article about fragments lifecycle. And these two articles basically will explain you how to handle lifecycle and remain sane. Because really lifecycle in Android is a huge problem and huge beta, and there are many methods, and it's really difficult to know which ones you should use. So I summarized my approach, which is like the most robust approach that can be. And I'm saying that it's the best approach, not because it's mine, but because what Google does today, like all kinds of lifecycle changes that they did in respect to like fragments lifecycle, and changes that will probably come in Android Q in respect to fragments on resume state, etc. All these changes are consistent with what I wrote and what I used for the past several years. So it's mandatory read for any Android developer. And I think that will be enough for this code review and maybe for this application in general. So again, Igor, big thumbs up. That's your educational project, and that's like what I think professional Android developers should do. Don't bring new technologies into your main projects, into the projects you are paid to work on. You should have like side project, toy project, where you test new approaches and see how they perform over time, and only then can you come and say like, well, let's adopt RX Java or let's adopt architecture component X or Y. Otherwise, I think it's simply unprofessional to bring new technologies into existing projects just to try them out. So Igor, huge respect, very good application, very good concept. You managed to squeeze a lot of technologies into here. I'm sure that you learned a lot from it, and I definitely learned several things from just reviewing your code. Hope that this code review will be helpful to you. And you Android developers out there, if you work on some real open source application that has real users and you would like it to be reviewed, then just send the link to me, because I will produce more code reviews and I need applications to work on. And don't forget to hit that like button down there so I know that you like this code review and it was useful. And if it wasn't, or maybe it was useful but you have questions or comments, then feel free, and I will even encourage you to do that. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. This will help me a lot and this will make future videos better for everybody. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a good day. Goodbye.